Let's say there's a writer on a title that you absolutely despise. You don't like their take on the character. You think it's all wrong. It's bad. Maybe that's a good thing. Let me explain. Hey there, this is Perch, and this is one of those videos that gets downvotes every time, particularly by people who really just want to hate on things, and they don't like hearing that, maybe things that you don't like are good for different reasons. But let me kind of go into my premise here, and it's an idea that's kind of been bubbling around in my head for a while, and it's going to take some work to really make my case. So I want to lay all these disclaimers out up front. I may not make my case successfully with you, but just kind of open your mind a bit and let me try and kind of wander down what I want to say. And I think the way this is going to work best is I'm going to use some specific examples like Tom King's run on Batman, but don't get too hopped up on Tom King and Batman. That's not really the point here. The point is a different take on the character. So I'll say, by one other disclaimer, kind of in the other direction, I like classic characters to be the way they are. I like to pick up a Captain America book and feel like I'm reading a Captain America book, not that I'm reading some bold new subverting expectations take on Captain America that isn't really Captain America, and we've kind of shoehorned in some whole different personality into an existing character. I don't like that. I think that's sloppy. But I think there's a very, very fine line, and here's where my argument will break down a little bit in terms of what makes up a good writer who is trying something new with a character versus a lazy writer sloppily doing something new with a character because they can't be bothered to understand what really makes the character tick. Those are two very different things. And I think that it's easy to mix the two up. It's very easy to think you're getting one and you're actually getting the other. So here's kind of my argument. Here's where I'm going to use some specific examples, but this is better if you abstract it for yourself. So we had Scott Snyder on Batman, and we had Tom King on Batman following. We went from one to the other. And there were plenty of people. I mean, the Scott Snyder run sold really well, and there was a general consensus, loose consensus, that his take on Batman was a good one. It was marketable. We want to move Scott Snyder up onto bigger and better things, so to speak. We want to get him on some big event books. We want to build him as a tent pole of a lot of the DC writing. And there's people out there you listen to who say, I don't like Scott Snyder. I don't like how he ignores what other writers have done and just does his own thing. And there's definitely Scott Snyder detractors, but there's not that many of them. More people generally say, okay, I like this and I want more of it. You can see that from the sales of Metal or Last Night on Earth or these different events. Scott Snyder brings a certain something to the title that people respond to, but not everybody. That's kind of key to my point I'm making here. And then Tom King comes on Batman, and sales are again strong, but there's more rumbling. There's more people who say, I don't like Tom King's run on Batman. It irritates me. It frustrates me, so on. So why is that? Why is it that Scott Snyder, who's doing his take on Batman, is fairly well liked, and Tom King's is not? And if you don't like Tom King or you don't like Scott Snyder, it's very tempting at this point in the video, at this point in the conversation, to say, well, that's because, blank writer, one of those two, is a, jerk and blank, 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 various names, who doesn't know anything about how to write comics and should just leave comics. And that's the realm of your opinion. That's fine. You can have that opinion. You can hold that opinion. You can take that opinion to the bank. It ultimately is your wallet buying the comics. So, of course, you should run with that opinion. But what is there that's more kind of fundamental about you have two writers doing two very different versions of Batman? And I believe, and here's where I think a lot of people will disagree, and I'll get the downvotes, that both writers, Snyder and Tom King, are both putting in effort to their stories. They're trying to get to the heart of Batman, and they're trying to do a unique take on it, fine. But I believe both men read past issues. I don't think somebody wandered in the office and they said, "Hey, Tom King, you're doing Batman today." And he's like, "I don't know anything about Batman, but screw it. I like money. I'll just start writing." That didn't happen. So, I think that they're both men are putting in effort. Both men are trying to do something with the comic, and in both cases, they're giving us two very different takes on Batman, but they're giving us, I would say, honest effort. And some may call that faint praise, but I mean, both are trying to put out a good story. Neither one is going, "Hey, you know what? I think I'll just completely piss everybody off and just write the worst version of Batman ever, and then ha ha ha, that will teach people." And I think that's sometimes how people react to Snyder or King. They act like there was some kind of master plot to just screw with the character. And I think if you swallowed that pill, I think you've gone pretty far down a track that it's hard for. I can't bring you back from it. I'll put you that way. And you're welcome again to that. You're welcome to that opinion. But I think then you have to subscribe to the notion that a comic publisher or writer, an individual, is deliberately setting out to destroy something. And I think that's. I'll just put again practically. That's pretty far fetched. That would be what would happen. So I go back to the kind of the Uber. Now replace what I just said with George Perez and John Byrne or Chris Claremont followed by Jim Lee or whatever, any number of kind of different takes on a character or a comic where there's a very different view that is happening. So a very, very different take on the character. And I will say for myself, and I'm speaking only for myself, you can hold your own opinion, but this is where I want you to kind of at least question your own ideas. For myself, over time, in the long run, I appreciate different voices lending that take to a character, even if I didn't like a particular writer or a particular take. Even if I didn't like the end output, I was pleased with the fact that there was I'll use fancy words, a tapestry of writers that tried different things along the course of this comic. And I always come to this conclusion when I read a big run. So I'll sit down or I'll unearth a long box. I'll irritate my family, my wife. Who am I kidding? Not my kids. By bringing this long box into the living room or into the media room, and I sit it there, and then I slowly go through the Avengers run, like the whole run, or usually in trades in some cases, or the entire X-Men run. The one I read most recently was the Avengers run. I started it at the beginning and I went through it all through. And as I was doing that, I was remembering like, oh, here's that time that Bendis had the Avengers all talking like it was a reality TV show. I hated that. And I did. At the time, I totally hated that. And when I was reading back over it, I, kind of eyes rolling, skimming those pages, because I just like, this is not good writing, not good comic. I just don't like this at all. But in the big picture, I found an appreciation for all these different styles, all these different takes on Avengers over the years, that even though I didn't like one of them, I still appreciated seeing the characters and seeing it from all angles. And I think when you're reading it kind of in real time, like if you don't like Scott Snyder's run or you don't like Tom King's run, if you're reading it in the moment and you don't like it, then it's more irritating. But if you take a big step backward and you look at it in the 20, 30, 50-year time frame, then these breaks in a solid narrative become good. Now, there is one exception to everything I'm saying, and that is every now and then I do think a writer comes along that clearly has no interest in the character. And people can, I think, leave your comments below of people that fit this bill. But I would argue, and I think this may be the Kelly era of X-Men, I think that there was stories in there that made me feel like he wasn't and I can't see into his heart or mind. I don't know. But I question if he wanted to be on that comic, because there was just, there were arcs that kind of, and subplots that kind of came up and then went nowhere. And then there were, storylines. I remember there was a couple, like it was a 5-part story and then it became a 4-part story. And then just kind of, it just felt at various times like going through the motions. Now, again, that may be just me. And I think it is in the eye of the beholder. who is somebody that maybe you don't like the writing, but you can respect the effort, versus somebody where you don't like the writing and you think there is no effort. And I think this is where maybe Tom King is a good example to use, because there are people who don't like his take on Batman. But I would just ask, think for yourself, do you think he's phoning it in? And I would say no. I think he is putting out a comic. He is putting the energy into trying to tell a story that he thinks you're going to enjoy, or he's trying to tell something. He's trying to go somewhere with this comic, and you may or may not like the execution. And in the end of the day, the execution does need to be good. But I still believe there's a major difference, at least for me, between somebody who is putting in the effort and telling a story you don't like, versus somebody who just doesn't want to be there in the first place and is just throwing stuff against the wall. I think that there's those moments. I questioned, and I'll commit heresy here. I think some of Chris Claremont's stuff at various times, as I've gone back and I've read the X-Men, there are some points where he feels exhausted. It just feels like he's telling a story, but it's like he's been with it for too long. Some of the Excalibur stuff came across that way to me, of he just didn't seem invested in that concept. And then, maybe the team roster would change or something would come up. I think you put, every time that Claremont and Davis worked together, it felt like there were two people having a great time. I think the same can be true with Scott Snyder and Greg Capullo. I think their comics read and feel like two people who are who like each other, who feel like they create magic when they work together, and there's an extra little passion that comes out in the page. Again, even if you don't like the story, I think you have that come across. I wasn't the biggest. I liked some of Snyder. I liked Snyder's run on Batman. I did personally. I liked it. I didn't like the Year Zero arc as much, but despite not liking it, I mean, compared to, I think, the Court of Owls stuff, I liked various other things. Death in the Family, I liked, but others didn't. That's probably the one I hear the most complaints about over his run, because for various reasons. But that's one that tends to be the more polarizing. But the Year Zero run was the one that I didn't like. I liked the least. Is that the way? I liked the least. But still, despite that, it felt like the writer and the artist had some, harmony with each other, for lack of a better word, and they were really enjoying their work together, and it came across in the page, and I think that's magical too. But I guess so I guess I made 2 points in one. The first thing is, for me, I think in the grand scheme of things, having different voices come on a comic is actually a good thing. And I appreciate those differences. And I appreciate the differences even if I don't like all the voices. For me personally, I think that there's the variety is still good. Now, by the way, in everything I've just said, I am not talking about you take a character and you're like, I'm going to really subvert expectations and I'm going to kill them and I'm going to replace them with all the check mark, different, we're going to make this a different race, different gender, disabled, sexual preference. We're just going to make it everything different. I think that's different. I think that's subverting the whole character. I'm talking about somebody who comes in and they're writing same old Bruce Wayne, but they're writing him in a different way, like Tom King does, versus Scott Snyder, versus James Tyrion IV, versus all these different writers have done different takes. So that's what I'm talking about. So what do you think? Does this ring true to you? Am I wrong? Is this do you have a completely different way of looking at it? That's okay. This is just kind of my thought for the day about characters and their takes, and why different writers doing different things is not all bad, even if you don't like it during one particular era. So let me know what you think below. Leave a comment, like, subscribe, and follow me on Twitter at Comic Perch. I'm still have the habit in my voice of saying click the bell for notifications, even though I despise that whole process, so I don't even want to recommend it anymore. But definitely subscribe, tell a friend. All that stuff is cool if you like to. Somebody said, I didn't like your video. You didn't mention the Iceman gay joke. I am not going to subscribe. That's okay too. If you don't like what I'm saying here, then for God's sake, don't subscribe. Please don't subscribe. Hey, there goes a fire truck. Whatever you do, don't subscribe to garbage. And if you do come in these videos and you're really hoping for a good roast of Scott Snyder or Tom King, hey, no problem. There are literally 1,000 videos out there for you. You can find them. Just put in Tom King, just in Google search, and they'll come up. No, no worries. They're out there. Thanks for listening. Have a great day.